The third example is in the Lord of the Rings, the characters that are in all the Lord of the Rings movies, all three of them, and the three Hobbit films, the Hobbit trilogy, is Gandalf and Elrond. And I think there is another one, and I think it's Galadriel. Regardless, we're talking about Bond here. So we really have, in regards to the James Bond character, he has had 6 different actors, soon to be 7, as one character. Now each of these characters aren't a different Bond, but rather represent a perspective or accentuation on one or more personality traits of Bond. And when taken as a conglomeration altogether, they take on the holistic character of who Bond is. A simpler way of saying this is they are many parts of a whole of the man James Bond. So this brings us finally to the 5th and final technique. It's called converted timeline. What this is the times, the dates, the world events aren't to be taken literally. Instead, they are used only as a means to stay current with the audience so as to maintain a greater impact and deeper connection with the audience and the fans. The dates and times used in the films aren't when the actual events in the film happen. Bond is always current, and whenever or wherever Bond is, it is during his lifetime in his 20 to 30 year career. I mean, listen, they don't want to keep an actor around until he's 80 years old. They'll get a new actor to portray the same character around the same age or the same time period. You're looking at a 20 to 30 year time frame for Bond's career, even though the franchise spans the films over 50 years of real time. Bond hasn't aged because in his time frame it hasn't been 50 years. It's converted time. This eliminates the objection of the technological changes also, because they fall into the same concept of maintaining Bond's contemporary status. It also is the reason Martin Campbell and the crew, they didn't make Casino Royale a period piece. You know, going back to one of the previous videos on debunking the reboot, Martin Campbell didn't tell us that Casino Royale was a reboot. In fact, he literally said it's an origin piece, and they were thinking about doing a period piece, but they decided not to do that. So, and that's the reason it's converted time frame. So the period piece, and it wasn't a period piece and it wasn't a reboot, but rather an origin piece. This concept also eliminates race as a factor for being the same character, because if a character can be played by Pierce, who is Irish, Sean, who is Scottish, George, who is Australian, then Leiter being African American or Caucasian American is an irrelevant factor, because we're all one race anyway. Evidence from this comes from 2 quotes, both by Michael Wilson. The first is from the BBC doc, Looking for Mr. Bond 007. And Michael Wilson says here, quote, "We decided after the last film," speaking of Die Another Day, "to go back to a more realistic Bond, sort of go back to basics, go back to the classic Bond, and we hope that that's something the audience will appreciate. I think people are looking for something a little less frivolous today. The world's changed a lot, and Bond, he always changes with the world." End quote. And that right there is the key, is Bond always changes with the world, but he's the same character. He's always in the present. And the second quote by Michael Wilson is a lot more blatant about this subject, and it is from the documentary the James Bond story. And he says, this was in 1999, but Michael Wilson says, the film character of James Bond depends on two things. It depends on the actor that plays him and the time in which the actor plays the role, because Bond always lives in contemporary time when the films are made. You can find that documentary on YouTube. And the date for the first quote is 2015. So Michael here is blatantly saying that Bond always lives in the current time with all his movies. So in a sense, we're looking at James Bond in a 20 to 30 year period. We're not looking at him from Sean Connery was the first episode in Dr. No to Brosnan ending. And we're not looking at Craig's 4 as reboots. We're looking at them from Casino Royale being the first one to Brosnan's Die Another Day being the last one. Now I'm going to get to that later. That's after this video. That's how I'm going to explain it all, and you'll see what I'm saying. Okay, so all those things, all those dates, those times, those technologies, all that stuff, it doesn't matter. They're not being literal. Some of examples of those are M's Cold War quote in Casino Royale. That's a tongue-in-cheek joke. And why? If you go back to the reboot, the debunking the reboot video, you'll see that. Because the point is very short. They wanted to do Casino Royale from the beginning. And in the beginning, it was during the Cold War. Secondly, the book itself is talking about the Cold War. So they updated the Casino Royale book rather than making it a period piece to the modern time. And this quote by Michael Wilson is from 1999. So anyways, or I should check that because the documentary is actually from 1999. I don't know if Michael Wilson's quote within that is actually from 1999. But anyway, regardless, the explanation for that is it is a breaking the fourth wall, tongue-in-cheek joke about when and how they wanted to originally do Casino Royale, and then bringing it to the modern era saying, oops, this never happened until we got the rights. So go back and watch that video if you haven't, and that'll give you the background for it. That's why I did that. Another example is the security tape in Casino Royale, which is dated as the current date. The third one is M was a director in China in 1997, according to Skyfall. And it doesn't make sense. And I'll get to that later too. Once we get to Skyfall, I'll hash that out. Tracy's Tomb in For Your Eyes Only has the dates, and they're just, those dates don't mean anything. They're not being literal. What they're saying is they're equating the James Bonds as one. That's why they're doing that. They're saying Moore and Lazenby's Bond is one. And the various dates in the Brosnan films, those dates pop up in his quite often. But let's see, in closing out the film theory concept, which helps debunk all this stuff, I'm going to leave you with this quote from Michael Apted, the director of The World Is Not Enough, from the commentary, The World Is Not Enough. He says, quote, "It's always fun in Bond movies to get some continuity performance, particularly if you have an asset like Robbie. He's speaking of Robbie Coltrane there. It's hard because I suppose not everybody's seen GoldenEye, and they might not remember it that well. So you have to recreate the character, and yet he still has that same limp. He had it in the last one, and some of the banters he's had with Bond. But I think it adds to the familiarity that people love so much of the franchise, that certain faces keep reappearing. And again, that's one of the challenges of doing the films, to make it timely, to make it a good contemporary story, and yet play into that timelessness. ... Like Coltrane, like Judi Dench, so it becomes like an old friend. So hopefully you have both that timely and timeless element to the film, which I think separates it off from everything else in the marketplace and gives it its unique style and tone. ... You have to have some continuity with the character that starts all the way back from Sean. End quote. So we have a director right there basically saying the challenge with the Bond films is to make them current to where they are, but bring back the timelessness of the past of who Bond is. And they usually do a really good job at it. Now we're going to be moving on. I've done all this film theory, film history, debunking reboot, and defining reboot. And now we're going to go on to the bread and butter, the good stuff, which I like the most. I'm just going to talk about chronology, continuity, and debunking codename, and building showing you guys the connections to why James Bond is one single character. All right, thanks for listening, and we'll see you later. Bye. A few things I just wanted to add on to the end of this are that I missed earlier is, when it comes to the reboots, to the concept of rebooting, you wouldn't call The Hobbit a reboot of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and you wouldn't call episodes 1, 2, and 3 of Star Wars a reboot of episodes 4, 5, and 6. And the same thing is with Daniel Craig starting Casino Royale and his 3 other movies. And there's one thing that actually Barbara Broccoli in an interview says. The name of the interview is Casino Royale Behind the Scenes, and it's on YouTube. The clip is only about a minute long, but Barbara says they were looking for an actor who would be able to play the beginning of Bond's career. So we have them talking about that their idea of reboot is not a new Bond, not a new timeline, but rather it's the beginning. It's an origin. The 4 movies of Craig are origin pieces.